Hi guys, happy Wednesday. So for today, we are going to be going over and talking a little bit more deeply about the Southern colonies. You do have your quiz on Friday over our first presentation, but now we wanted to go over and kind of talk a little bit more about the history of the Southern colonies and how they came to be. So there's a couple of things I'd like for you to have out in front of you. The first of which is a pencil. The second thing I'd like for you to have in front of you are the notes that correspond with this presentation. They look like this. They say Southern colonies at the very top for me. As we're going through, please make sure that you're taking the time to complete these notes and to answer each question to the best of your ability. You will have a couple questions on Edpuzzle as well, but you won't have as many as you do on these notes. So whenever you need more time, please feel free to pause the video. That way you can jot down the answers and then you can press play again to continue on from where you left off. So let's go ahead and start with establishing the Southern colonies. Now we've talked about this already. We do have 5 colonies that are included when we talk about the Southern colonies. That would be Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and finally Georgia. These 5 states together are going to make up and comprise the colonies of the South. Now for the founding of Maryland. Maryland is actually going to be founded by a wealthy English family named the Calverts. The Calverts during this time period were Catholic, and they really wanted to come to the New World to start a new colony because they wanted religious freedom, just like our Puritans did, just like the Quakers did. They were unhappy in England, and they wanted to come over to have that religious freedom and that religious ability to practice the way they'd like to. King Charles I is now the king in England when we set up the Southern colonies, and he's going to go ahead and give the Calverts a charter for a new colony located on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay, just north of Virginia. Now this is really interesting because the Calverts are going to be proprietors, and if you can't remember what that word means, proprietors are going to be owners. So the Calverts are the proprietors or owners of this colony. They own it privately, so they're the ones that are in charge. They're the ones that can establish the laws and rules and guidings. We will talk a little bit about another type of colony called a royal colony here in a moment. But you want to know that Maryland is founded by the Calverts. They're very rich and wealthy. They're English and they're Catholic. That's the most important thing to remember. Now, Cecilius Calvert was also named Lord Baltimore. He came over and he was actually the proprietor. He was the head of the family and he's going to be the ultimate owner of the colony. He decided to name the colony Maryland. Now, for life in Maryland and Virginia, the first colonists are going to arrive in Maryland in 1633. Many of these people, though, are indentured servants. Okay, so they're coming over with very little money. They're coming over for free, and they're planning on working a couple years of their life in order to kind of have these new opportunities and have this new life ahead of them. The colonists are going to build Maryland's first settlement near the Potomac River, and they're going to call that St. Mary City. So on the map that we colored yesterday or the day before, depending which class you're in, St. Mary City, we colored that and we looked at it. That's going to be where the colonists settle when they're coming over. That's the first colony in Maryland for the Calverts. Now there are going to be many similarities between Virginia and Maryland, and here's a couple of them. Both colonies share a location close to the Chesapeake Bay and the Potomac River. They're very, very close when it comes to climate and land. Tobacco is going to grow very well in both of these colonies, so that's going to be one of the largest cash crops. Remember, when we're talking about cash crops, we're talking about crops that you're selling for the sole purpose of gaining money. Okay, so they're not using it for themselves, they're using it for an income, okay, to add money to themselves. More similarities is that Maryland soon had too many tobacco plantations. Just like Virginia, they're going to be really robust in this area, and they're going to have quite a bit. Enslaved Africans are going to come over, and these enslaved Africans are actually going to be replacing many of our indentured servants. So rather than them working for a short period of time and then becoming free, these enslaved Africans worked their entire lives. So a lot of the owners didn't have those issues of trying to figure out, okay, now my indentured servants' time is up. Now what do? I need all this help. Maryland and Virginia both had governors and elected assemblies as well, so their governments were set up very similarly too. Some differences, though, between them. In Virginia, the king ruled since it was a royal colony, but in Maryland, the Calverts had control since it was a proprietary colony. Now, here's the big difference. If it's a royal colony, that means the king is the one in charge. So the king has direct say in laws and in governments. If it's going to be a proprietary colony, that means it's privately owned, either by a family or an individual. Now, unlike Virginia, Maryland welcomed many different religions. So Maryland was very open and tolerant of other religions and belief systems. Virginia, on the other hand, was not. They were very kind of isolated in that regard. The Toleration Act is going to be passed in 1649. This act gave religious freedom to all Christians. So as long as you're a Christian, this gave you the ability to believe in whatever you'd like, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Christian, whether you're a Puritan, you could believe whatever you'd like if you had this Toleration Act in your colony of Maryland. Now, as for Carolina, in 1663, England's new king, Charles II, is going to give land for a colony south of Virginia. This colony was called Carolina. It's divided among 8 leaders called the Lords Proprietors. Now, the Lord Proprietors adopted a constitution or written plan of government for the colony. It allowed free white males to make some laws and decide on certain leaders. However, most power remained with the king and the group of proprietors. So Carolina is actually going to start off with a royal colony. The king is still in charge, but these lords of proprietors are kind of going in to oversee and do the work of the king. In 1712, the Lord Proprietors decided to split Carolina into 2 colonies, which is why we have North Carolina and South Carolina today. Okay, they decided to kind of part ways and split the land up amongst themselves. In North Carolina, farmers are going to grow mostly tobacco and corn. However, in South Carolina, the climate is going to be wetter. It's very warm down there. It's going to be wetter. Farmers there are instead going to grow rice, and were taught how to grow rice from enslaved Africans who were brought to the colonies to work. Now, if you've ever seen like a rice farm, we'll look at pictures here soon, it needs to be very wet, almost drowning for this rice to grow. And that was the perfect climate for South Carolina there. As for Georgia, in 1727, another English king is going to be ruling. His name is George I. He decides to start a colony south of South Carolina. Now, a gentleman named James Oglethorpe is going to have an idea for this colony. So he decides to tell the king, hey, we have a lot of debtors. Remember, debtors are people who had been put in prison for owing money. And this is big because rather than keeping them in prisons and trying to pay for them to be fed and clothed and sheltered, he says, you know what, king, we could take all of these different people who owe money still to the colonies, and we can go ahead and put them in a new colony called the Georgia colony. Once we put them there, we can put them to work. They'll be out of our hair. They'll be in a different place, and we won't have to worry about them. It's a very unique idea, but it's an idea that the king actually really likes. He likes it so much that he decides to give Oglethorpe a charter for the Georgia colony. Now, the first settlers arrive in 1733, and they're going to be the ones who found Savannah. At first, the leaders of Georgia, they limit the size of farms, and they don't allow slavery at first. However, over time, the leaders are going to decide to expand their farms because other colonies are doing it in the South, and they're seeing how successful they are. Because of this, though, they also decide to allow slavery. And as a result, the economy is going to grow along with the labor of enslaved Africans. So that means their plantations are growing larger, and because they're getting so much larger and because they're growing so many more crops, they need more hands in the fields. Because of this, the slavery field is going to just be booming, especially in Georgia. So that's something that's very interesting to this time period. Okay, double check yourself. Make sure you have all of your notes completed. Once you have all of your notes completed, what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and take our comparing and contrasting worksheet amongst all 3 of our different colonies. So the New England colonies, the Middle colonies, and the Southern colonies. What you're going to be doing is you're going to be using your notes to complete this independently. This is something we'll go over tomorrow in class. As for today, I'd like for you to just keep it right in your binder for me. Once you're finished doing that chart, you're going to be silent reading, and your sub will give you directions after that. All right, guys, see you later.